Early in the morning, Vasily drove to work in the field. The sun had not yet risen from behind the horizon. The morning coolness was pleasantly refreshing. The road ran through the fields past an old farm where no one had lived for 20 years. The place was notorious among the local population. Suddenly, the man noticed a light-colored bag at the edge of the field. Someone had thrown out the garbage again. Swearing heartily, Vasily turned off the main road, stopped the car, and went to look. But, barely approaching, the man was scared to death. It was not a bag of garbage, but a girl in a light-colored sundress. He cautiously approached the body to check for a pulse. He had just started to turn her over when a low moan sounded. The girl appeared to be alive. Only who was she? The face was vaguely familiar and no one had disappeared from them. Vasily took out his phone and called the ambulance, and 10 minutes later they came. Surprisingly, the ambulance was still running. The girl was taken away. The district police officer who arrived at the same time as the ambulance wandered around with a smart look. "Who is she? Does her face look familiar?" Vasily asked, getting behind the wheel. He was already very late for work, but he hoped that he would be forgiven. After all, he had saved a man. "We'll sort it out, Vasya, we'll sort it out," said the policeman, giving Vasily a look. Zina was reading another novel by the light of the table lamp. In their small rural hospital there was an inpatient ward, where 5 patients were now being treated. She knew them all. She had lived in the same village all her life. But in the morning they brought a girl without documents and even unconscious. For some reason they did not dare to take her to the city. The doctor forbade to touch her, saying that we would not bring her back. They put a drip as prescribed by the doctor. The girl came to her senses for a while, then fell asleep. But she had no time to say what had happened to her and who she was. The woman wanted to sleep, but she was afraid to lie down in the nurse's room in case something happened to the girl. She knew the others, and they had nothing serious in her opinion. And in the morning she would have to go to the funeral. Her neighbor, Baba Tanya, had died. Some people in the village talked about the old woman in different ways. Some called her a witch and praised her, and some remembered her kindly for her help. Antonina was well over 80 when she died. Of her relatives, only her granddaughter remained, and she had not come to the village for many years. Grandmother, as if she had a premonition of her death, and gave clear instructions on what and how to do with the funeral. In recent years, she had been helped by her neighbors, Zina and her husband on the one hand, and Faina and Leshka on the other. Faina's grandmother gave her all the instructions. Zina was just a backup. In the morning, Zinaida handed in her shift and went home. She had a lot of work to do and a funeral to attend. She came home just for 10 minutes to wash and change her clothes, and went to the neighbor's yard where people had already gathered. Faina fulfilled all Antonina's wishes, right down to the place in the cemetery. They buried her grandmother in the old part of the cemetery, as she wanted. After the wake, they cleaned up Grandma's house and left. Zina collapsed into bed and slept until the next morning. At home she was busy with things, and only when she came to the hospital for her shift, she found out all the news. Zink, the girl, woke up. At first she mooed like a mute, then she started talking. Mitrich still wants to send her to town. Something's wrong with her. She doesn't remember anything. Zina's partner, Svetka, was gibbering. She worked as a nurse and was the first gossip in the village. So what? Why do I need to know? You've come to your senses? And good, we have less to worry about. Let them really take her to the city. Zina waved away. In the afternoon, the woman went to the room to this unknown girl. She was recovering very quickly. Now the girl stood at the window, her hospital nightgown hanging like a stick. Her long hair was tangled, her face was gaunt, and there were bruises under her eyes. "Are you awake?" Zina asked. "Now I'll give you a shot and an IV, and then lunch and rest." Zina spoke automatically. Her hands were preparing the injection and the system, and she was staring at the girl. There was something very familiar in her appearance. It was not until evening that the nurse looked into the girl's room. She was sitting in the dark again, staring out of the window. The girl suddenly spoke, which frightened Zina. I remembered something. She said, I arrived at someone's house and they were waiting for me. I remember the bus, the smell of cut grass and a thunderstorm. There was a thunderstorm a few days ago, Zina agreed. She sat down on the bed. What else do you remember? I think the police have filed a report about you, but so far it's quiet. Maybe you have no relatives? I don't know, the girl said pitifully. I'm scared. Sorrowful, Zina answered quietly, stroking the girl's hair. I'll help you in any way I can. Thank you. In a week, the doctor had to discharge the girl, but how? Mitrik, the doctor, walked gloomily, thinking about his thoughts. Zina brought home-cooked food to the girl, for which she was grateful. Many people sympathized with the girl. Even Faina came once, bringing pancakes with jam. That evening there was a heavy thunderstorm and a downpour. Zina was on duty that day, and there was no one else in the hospital except the unknown woman. Everyone had already been discharged. Another roll of thunder tore the sky and a terrible scream sounded from the girl's room. Frightened, Zina rushed there and found the patient beating in an incomprehensible fit. She was shaking, her eyes rolled back, her lips were whispering something. Zina could not make out what. Suddenly the lights went out. The nurse cursed at the weather and bad wiring. The girl fell silent, and while Zina was bringing her to her senses, it seemed to her that they were not alone in the room. It was as if someone third, invisible, was watching them. Zina felt uneasy. My name is Glasha, came the girl's voice. Zina almost jumped from surprise and fright. I think I remember. How are you? I'm fine. Then tell me. Glafira grew up with her mother in the city. She didn't remember her father and they had no other relatives. Her mother sometimes went to some village to visit a distant relative, but Glafira was forbidden to ask about her relatives. Her mother died a day after the girl's 18th birthday, hit by a car. The girl got a tiny apartment, pennies on the savings book and an uncertain future. There was no talk of studying now. It was necessary to survive and work. Only 6 months after her mother's funeral, Glafira found the strength to sort out her things, including those that were hidden in the trunk. This chest had always been there, but her mother had forbidden her to look in it. In the chest, in addition to things, there were letters, photos, and documents. Thus, Glasha learned about her great-grandmother Antonina, who is still alive. There too, among the letters and documents, was the address of this grandmother. The girl hesitated for a long time. She was overcome by doubts and fears, although at the same time she was very attracted to this unknown grandmother. Antonina was sitting on the porch as if waiting for her. Come in, granddaughter. I've been waiting for you, girl. Grandma Tanya met the girl with affection. They did not have time to talk. Grandmother became worse, and then began a terrible hurricane, a thunderstorm. At that moment, Glafira remembered almost nothing. She woke up on the floor in the house. On her arm there was an incomprehensible scar, as if from a burn. Her grandmother was lying on the bed, dead, and the memory lapse again. How she found herself behind the village in the field, unconscious, the girl could not explain. Well, at least we know who you are, and then let the authorities decide what to do, said Zina, when Glasha was silent. That's what's strange. What are you talking about? I helped at Grandma Tony's funeral, and there were no strangers in the house, said Zina. Do you think I'm lying? Glasha took offense. I'd like to know how I ended up in the field too. We'll find out. You know who your great-grandmother was, don't you? Zina asked cautiously. I didn't have time. I only realized that she was some kind of local witch doctor. She had all sorts of herbs in her house, books, candles. Glasha listed them all. That's right. Some people thought she was a witch. I remember her kindness, said Zina. She was very strong. Maybe that's why she called you. To pass on the power. Oh, it's all fairy tales. Fairy tales are not fairy tales, but I think the grandmother will remind me of herself again. Before discharge, Glasha was spoken to by the district officer and the doctor. The district doctor checked the data about Glasha and everything matched. The news about Antonina's great-granddaughter came as a surprise to the villagers. Everyone thought the old woman was lonely, and some of them were already looking at her house with a plot of land. While the documents were being sorted out, the district officer allowed Glasha to live in her grandmother's house. Zina brought her daughter's things and groceries, for which the girl thanked her heartily. Surprisingly, Glasha felt excellent energy and some kind of mental uplift. She had never felt such a feeling in her life. The girl immediately put the house in order, washed the floors, prepared a simple dinner and went to bed. She woke up in the middle of the night as if someone had not pushed her hard enough. It was pitch black outside the window. In the corner of the room something rustled and chugged. Glasha squirmed fearfully on the sofa. A wave of fear enveloped her. Did someone else sneak into the house? A burglar? Glafira stood up quietly and wanted to leave the room, but she couldn't. Her legs were stuck to the ground from fear. Suddenly the moon came out from behind the clouds and illuminated the whole room, and the girl almost lost her senses. In the corner of the room stood a hideous creature resembling a little old woman. It had sparse hair, white eyes and almost rotted skin on its face and body, and she was slurping and nibbling her fingers. "Delicious," the monster whispered. Glasha rushed outside, forgetting everything in the world. With a shout, she pounded on the door to the neighbors, except that Zina was on shift, and her husband was also on duty. So the girl sat in the yard until dawn. She cautiously entered the house. Everywhere was quiet, but the smell of deadness hung in the air. Spreading the windows wide open and opening the door, Glasha pulled out all the pillows, blankets and curtains to air out. "Are you doing a general cleaning?" Zina asked cheerfully. "Do you want me to help?" "If only cleaning." Glasha told the neighbor in detail about the events of the night and even invited her into the house. The woman barely entered the house, jumped out clutching her nose. "Wow, maybe a rat died somewhere?" Zina asked. "Yeah, a herd of rats," Glasha grimaced. "Let me help you." "I think it has something to do with Grandma," the girl said quietly as if someone could overhear them. "And you look, maybe there are some records," suggested Zina. "Right." Glasha put on a medical mask and rummaged through her grandmother's papers and found something. Several thick notebooks, and in two of them the entries were made in ink, slightly blurred from time. Until late in the evening the girl sorted out the records, then Zina called her to her house for dinner, as it was impossible to stay at Glasha's house. When it came to tea, another neighbor, Faina, dropped by. "Come in, do you want tea?" Zina invited her in. "I will." Faya stared at Glafira without blinking. "Are you Grandma's great-granddaughter? The heiress?" "Iya," the girl answered with a kind of calmness. She liked this woman. Her fingertips began to tingle for some reason. Well, heiress." Faina stretched out in a confused way. Faina spent the whole evening looking at Glasha. Glasha not even trying to hide it. Zina felt uncomfortable with her neighbor's behavior. Glasha tried to ignore it. She'd read something in her grandmother's notes. "I'll make a bed for you on the sofa," said Zina. "Oh, can I lie down on the veranda?" the guest asked. "Of course, but if mosquitoes eat you, don't complain," laughed the hostess. Glafira hoped that in 24 hours the odor would be gone and she would come back. She was not comfortable to embarrass the neighbors, who had already done a lot for her. So, in thought, the girl fell asleep unnoticed and woke up in the night from a nudge in her side. Everything repeated itself as it had done the previous night. The difference was that Glafira was ready. She jumped up and quickly scooped salt into a pre-prepared cup. The usual coarse salt found in every kitchen was a resounding success. Literally, the creature shrieked in some unthinkable range, and at the places where the salt had hit, the flesh disintegrated before their eyes. Zina and her husband came running to the squeals and stared at the creature stunned. Zina's husband flicked the switch, but the light did not come on. But the creature itself suddenly disappeared. Grandmother's notes describe in detail the ritual of the transfer of the force. When a witch knows for sure that her end is near, she looks for a receiver. Most often from blood relatives, less often outsiders. Outsiders are more likely to become unwilling carriers of the force and quickly perish. That's why all the events in Glafira's life came together in such a way. She came to the village. Apparently her grandmother conducted a rite of passage of the force. But was this rite carried out to the end, or were they interfered with? Glasha thought they'd been interrupted and the force had gone to her, but it wasn't right. She could feel the force bubbling inside her, her blood boiling and eager to burst out and burn everything around her. This creature absorbs the witch's energy. It feeds on fear and emotion. I found it in the records and about. And there is also a ritual, how to find out the name of the one who wishes me harm, Glasha said quietly. She and Zina agreed to meet in the evening outside the village at the site of the old cemetery. Both cemeteries were located on the mountain just behind the village. The women stood in front of a huge fire, bareheaded and in shirt sleeves. Zina timidly repeated the words of the call after Glasha. The girl seemed to be reborn before her eyes. From a simple girl she became a powerful witch. Her eyes, her face, even her figure changed. When the flames rose up, Antonina appeared in front of Glasha. She looked young and her eyes looked lovingly at her granddaughter. Glafira looked at her grandmother and realized that they didn't need words, they understood each other. "Everybody's here," Faina said angrily. "The old one has come, it's all of you," exclaimed Glasha. "How could you?" Zina barely audibly said, "No problem, how long did I take care of the old woman? And the result? I gave a gift to a girl with no family and no tribe, old hag." Faina was furious, "I asked you nicely." With these words, Faina suddenly rushed at Glasha and threw her to the ground, trying to reach her neck. Zina was confused for the first few seconds, but quickly pulled herself together. She grabbed a stick that happened to be in hand, and hit Faina with all her might. The woman collapsed and lost the creature. Glasha and her grandmother held hands and finished the ritual of transferring the force. Glafira brought the grandmother's house in a decent look, made repairs, changed the roof, broke flower beds in the yard and put a greenhouse in the vegetable garden. The girl joined the simple rural life but lived as if by herself, isolated. Yes, to her especially did not interfere. It was as if she was surrounded by a barrier. She was friendly, but that's all. She communicated mainly only with her neighbors, and went to the city only a couple of times for documents and to rent an apartment. Faina paid for her deeds with her health. She was diagnosed with a serious illness and died quickly, though she later asked Glafira to forgive her. Glafira forgave her, but it was not for her to decide who and how the powers would punish. Glafira eventually took her great-grandmother's place, tying her life to magic.